everyone, so I'm here again with Martin Austwick, aka Oz from the English Martial Arts Academy again. So in the previous video we touched on a brief overview of unarmed martial arts and some British examples that are featured in HEMA and that Oz trains in and teaches. And something came up in that video which I'd like to ask a little bit more about, and that's, you mentioned that there was a Lancashire style of wrestling that developed into catch as catch can. For viewers who don't know much about wrestling, and in fact for myself as well as I don't, if you could talk a bit more about that, you know, the style, perhaps the styles of wrestling that were around and how that developed into a modern sport, and what is catch as catch can?
Sure, okay. Well, the thing to bear in mind is that, as we mentioned before, each region in the country had its own sort of regional style of wrestling, and they were distinct in that they had different rule sets. So certain areas would take hold in a certain way and you'd wrestle from that position. Certain areas would say you're not allowed to take hold of the legs. Certain areas would wear specific clothing and you'd hold the jacket in a specific way, and you'd wrestle within that rule set. As the name suggests, catch as catch can is simply saying you can essentially do whatever you want. You can take hold however you want to take hold. And unlike most of the regional systems, the fight didn't stop when you went to the ground. With all of these things, we're creating a false situation. What we're essentially doing is we're getting our opponent to a point where we can say, I would have been able to kill you in this instance. And in most of those, that's considered to be when your opponent hits the floor. In things like Cornish wrestling, what we're looking for is to get them to hit the floor in a specific manner. What we want is for their shoulder blades and the hips to hit the floor simultaneously so they lie flat. And the more likely you are to do that, the more points you score. Catch as catch can didn't stop, or traditional Lancashire wrestling didn't stop until you actually pinned someone's shoulders to the floor. So it wasn't enough to throw them to the floor because they'd simply roll over and stand back up. You had to go down with them and hold them to the ground. And what this meant is that it developed, as well as a system of pins, also a system of submission holds to stop your opponent getting back up. And the combination of the two gives you this modern wrestling that's undergoing a bit of a resurgence today. There are a few people still teaching it in the UK that have a living lineage that goes back hundreds of years, back to traditional Lancashire catch. And also there's a very interesting American carny scene. There's a few of the old professional wrestlers, people like Billy Wicks is still teaching. Dick Cardinal I don't think is anymore, but he has been. So so we have two styles of catch as catch can out there that are subtly different but share a huge amount of similarities. Cool.
And just for those of us who don't know very much about modern wrestling at all, what from a layman's point of view, what's the difference between, say, catch as catch can and or catch wrestling as it's sometimes known, and say judo, for example? Because a lot of people have maybe seen judo or done judo. What are the basic differences between those?
Well, again, I mean, you can look at any of these. You can look at BJJ, you can look at judo, you can look at Russian Sambo, you can look at catch as catch can. The main difference is rule set, basically. What catch as catch can is a rule set that allows you to do certain things. It's very difficult to look at which techniques are specific to which art now, because obviously there's been such a huge cross-pollination from one to the other. You look at things like Pride in Japan and the UFC in America, and all these arts are kind of thrown together and people are picking out the best techniques. One of the techniques that's very specific to catch as catch can, a double wrist lock, is found in BJJ and described as a kimura after a guy who was very good at it. So it's very difficult to say specifically how they differ. There are certain things that tend to happen in different systems. Judo guys are very, very good at throwing. Catch guys are very good at chaining techniques from one from the other. In BJJ you tend to fight from specific positions, and position is the first goal and then submission after that, and so on and so forth. Sambo guys like leg locks. But these things are all found in the different arts. So it's really, it's the historical side of it, and it's the rule set that define it.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that there are common techniques, obviously, in all styles of wrestling, because there are certain things that just work. And this touches on things we've said in previous videos, where You know, for example, for my part, I know that in Fiore de Liberi's Defence Against the Dagger, you can find techniques that you can also find in World War II commando manuals, and you can also find in Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu, because there are some things that are just so basic and effective that you just find them in many areas. But that's great. Okay, we'll talk more about some different topics in following videos, but thank you very much.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you.